My name is Pam Thompson, and I'm here with my husband, Mark Thompson, who is doing the video recording for us today. And I am honored to be interviewing Mr. Billy Julian Crane, who is a World War II veteran. Today's date is August 14th of 2019, and we are 3.5 weeks away from Billy's 95th birthday. The interview is being conducted in Billy and his wife Barbara's home in Lafayette, Indiana, where they have lived for 63 years. And Barbara Crane is here just as an observer with us. So, are we ready to go?
Yes.
All right, take it away.
My name is Bill Crane. I was born on September 7th, 1924. In 1929, the stock market crashed and there was a depression. My dad worked at Hubbard Steel in East Chicago, Indiana. And he was facing a tough job of paying the rent and getting enough food for himself, mom, and 5 boys. He got a few odd jobs, and we got some help from the government. Franklin Roosevelt started the NRA. It was a program in which the government bought surplus farm products and gave it to the needy. I remember getting packages. Some of them were like navy beans, and it said not to be sold. In 1939, a war broke out, and the Germans made quick work of France, and they threatened England. Franklin Roosevelt thought that knew that we would eventually have to go to war and help Britain. And he immediately starting to build up the military in the United States. And a funny thing, when he did that, my dad went back to work at Hubbard Steel. And went back to work at Hubbard Steel. I was sitting in the kitchen, and my mom and dad were listening to the radio. They come running in and said that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And Dad said that me and my older brother Bob would probably have to go to war. I spent some time talking with the neighbor kids about what to do, and most of them didn't want to go to the Army, so they said they were going to volunteer to get in the Navy. And so I decided to do that too. And my neighbor, Joe Zarnick, and I, we got on the South Shore and went to Chicago. Then we got on a train and went to Great Lakes. Great Lakes Naval Base. At the Naval Base, we were in boot camp. The first thing I did in boot camp was to give us uniforms, and then they checked, gave us a GI haircut, and we were to see a dentist. The dentist had me open my mouth and said, "Oh my God," I had only been to a dentist once before, and he did a lot of work on me and filled a lot of cavities. At 95, I still have my teeth, and I think most of my teeth, and I think he was part of that. There was in boot camp, we did a lot of drilling and marching. Everybody had to do KP duty, and I do a job going to a refrigerated building where they brought in frozen foods, and the mess hall would take orders. We would take orders from the mess hall and send them over frozen foods. It was normal to get up in the morning and march for an hour, and then go in and have breakfast. And the meals at the boot camp were a lot larger than the meals at home. So I gained 10 pounds while I was in boot camp. A typical breakfast had things like potatoes we never had for breakfast at home. Potatoes and a lot of grits and pancakes and everything you can think of. One of the dishes that everybody liked at breakfast time was chipped beef on toast. We had the enduring term for that of shit on a shingle. in boot camp, we started. We would went to lift, learn how to lift and raise and lower lifeboats. We went to rifle range and learned how to use a gun. We went to the swimming pool and they threw everybody in the pool. And the ones that couldn't drink, they gave them training on how to stay afloat. At the end of boot camp, I was told that I was going to be sent to a signal school in the armed guard at Treasure Island in California. The armed guard was a program where guns were put on ships. They had this same program during World War One. The guns were needed because they had to defend themselves against submarines and airplanes. Gun crews were formed to take care of the guns. My first ship that I went on was a Liberty ship, and the Liberty ship. When the war started out, the Germans sank a lot of merchant ships, and there was shortage of merchant ships. And when the war started, they needed more ships for carrying troops and provisions all over the world. And Franklin Roosevelt helped push the Liberty ship program, and they started all over the United States. They started making prefabricated parts of the Liberty ships. Then the prefabs were sent to 20 different shipbuilding places and were put together. This is a picture of the Liberty ship Robert Perry. This ship was put together in 4.5 days. Service on a Liberty ship was good for the Navy men, the armed guard that went on them. The meals were good. We had they gave us menus and we ordered what we wanted for our meals. We boarded the ship in San Francisco, and while we boarded, they were loading the ship, and the load they were putting on looked like it was military parts and provisions and things, and we think that they were being taken off and used in Hawaii, where our first trip was going. We like to watch the stevedores load the ships. They fill nets with boxes and goods and lower them into the hold, and then the stevedores would take them out and stack them up inside the hold, and then the net would go back out. When we got the ship, when the ship was loaded, we left for Hawaii. We ran by ourselves, and it only took us 7 days to get to Hawaii. As we approached Hawaii, everybody's looking forward to getting ashore. So sometimes you get a high, which the old timers used to call channel fever. As we went along the coast of Oahu, and we passed Diamond Head, and we saw the pink building, which was the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Then we went by the Aloha Tower, and they sent us our first message that we ever got, and it was, "Welcome to Hawaii, Aloha." And then they told us that we were going to dock in Pearl Harbor. When you dock in a harbor, a pilot boat would come out and come alongside the ship, and there was a rope ladder. He'd climb up on the ship, and he would be in charge of the ship when it went into the harbor. We docked at a pier, a large pier. The pier was covered by a building, and the building was full of workshops and things where I think they were working on parts and things for the ships in Pearl Harbor. And looking across Pearl Harbor on the other side, we could see the Arizona structure that was sticking up out of the water. It was 1 year and 1 day after Pearl Harbor. Liberty in Hawaii was great. We went into Honolulu, we swam at Waikiki Beach, we went to the Royal Palace. One of the best places we went was the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. They had turned it into a submarine base because that was rough service, and we came in there for rest and relaxation. In the middle of the Royal Hawaiian, they had a ice cream parlor, and everybody visited while they was there. They unloaded the ship. We went right back to San Francisco. This time when we got back to San Francisco, we had a different load. They were loading war material. They were loading ammunition and arms, and in the gun crew, they were short of help. The gun crew, they offered us an opportunity to help, and they paid us for it. We could volunteer. I worked in a hold for about 4 days. When they got near the end, they put some tanks right in the middle of the hold. We left. When they finished, we left San Francisco. We pulled out into the Pacific, and each ship we were in a 10 convoy ship. Each ship was pulling a barge. We had 2 escorts, 2 destroyer escorts. This is the first time where we really did some real signaling. In a convoy, there's always the Commodore. The middle ship in the front row is the Commodore. Most of the signals are flag hoists. They would raise flags, and the top flag might be a flag that indicated they were going to change the speed. If they did that, there would be 1 or 2 number flags underneath, like an 8 would be 8 knots, and the 12 1 2 would be 12 knots. Every ship in the convoy had to raise the same flags that the Commodore had at. When the Commodore saw that all of the flags were up, then he could pull the flag hoist down and execute the turn. And if it was speed, when he pulled the flag down, everybody would change their speed to what the flags called for. If it was a turn, there would be 3 flags, like, for example, 360, which would be north, so everybody would turn and be going north. We also had some signals from with flashing lights on this trip. A destroyer came up once and said, "You are making too much smoke." And then another time they come up and said, "You're lagging behind too far, close up." This time when we got to Hawaii, we dropped off the barges. We headed south, and we crossed the international time zone, and we crossed the equator. When we crossed the equator, they had the old timers were members of Neptunus Rex, and all of the newcomers were polywogs. They had an initiation to get all the polywogs into the Neptunus Rex. And in peacetime, this was quite extensive. But in wartime, they just took a bucket of salt water and dumped over us, and then they give us a certificate that said we belonged to Neptunus Rex. We went on south, and we went to the island, to Fiji Islands, to Suva in the Fiji Islands. Well, in the harbor there were bumboats that would come out, and they brought fruit and shells and things to trade. They took either money or cigarettes. All the Navy people got rations of cigarettes, and I never smoked, so I used my cigarettes. I got a couple of shell necklaces. We left Suva, and we headed to. We left Suva, and we went to. Oh boy.
New Guinea.
We left Suva. Oh boy. Yeah, I ought to know this real good. We left Suva. It's sad.
Is there-
I did
is-
this so many times and
Is there, where did you go after you went to where was your place after that?
Suva, let's see.
You can come back and tell us where that was.
Man,
and then-
oh man,
It's
I've
okay.
done this 100 times and I never forgot this.
It's okay, it's okay.
Suva, Suva, Suva.
Is it in your notes?
No, here. Why didn't I look down here? We went to New Caledonia. I should have looked at this.
Okay.
We went to New Caledonia. On the way to New Caledonia, we passed armada of ships. There was an aircraft carrier, a couple battleship cruisers and destroyers. It was quite a sight. In Noumea, it was a large harbor, and it was full of ships. And we lowered the lifeboat and got ashore, and there was a French settlement there where we went into a restaurant and got some a snack and some soda pop. The natives there all had orange hair from betel nut juice. We went in the harbor was the Saratoga was in the harbor with the aircraft carrier. We went aboard the Saratoga, and they had I saw the signalman, and they had a sewing machine and made me a couple of semaphore flags. We left Noumea, and we headed for New Hebrides. And in New Hebrides, we threw a rope over the side, a rope ladder, and we jumped in the water and went swimming. And we didn't realize the tide was so bad, and we drifted out, and it was awful hard to swim back to the rope ladder because of the tide. While we were in New Hebrides, in August of '42, the Marines, the American Marines, had invaded the island of Guadalcanal and captured an airfield that the Japanese were building. There was a lot of fighting at that time. There was battleship fighting, or there was ship fightings outside of the Solomon Islands, and they were all fighting to get inside there. The Japanese broke through one time, and they sunk some ships off of Guadalcanal, and they shelled the troops at Henderson Field.
Go to your next place.
We were able to get, we were not able to go ashore at Guadalcanal, but we got ashore, we went ashore at Tulagi, which is an island across the channel from Guadalcanal. The Japanese had occupied this island, but they were driven off, or killed or driven off. There was a Japanese camp there that we visited, and looking for souvenirs. There was nothing there but empty cans, worn out sandals, and garbage. While we were there at Guadalcanal, there was only a few cases where we had a little action. One time, a Japanese fighter flew right over the top of our ship, and they were only 50 feet above us. They were not after us. They were headed for Henderson Airfield. That was their priority. At other times at night, they would send over a real loud airplane, which they probably wanted to disturb the sleep of the Marines. The Marines called it Washing Machine Charlie. Another time there was at the end, at the western end of the channel we were in, there was two islands, and in between the islands was the island of Savo. This is a place that the Japanese would have to gone through to attack there, to attack Guadalcanal. And we saw some action there, and the Marines told us later that there was the destroyer that was patrolling that was sunk. When I got home after war, I think that one of my neighbors was on that ship. His name was Solon Allen. One of my neighbors was on that ship. When the ship was almost unloaded, a destroyer come out and said, "Get out." We pulled up anchor and we went back to the Solomon Island, or to Noumea. Well, as we left that night, we looked back and we could see flashes of light. After the war, I looked into history, and on February the 8th, the Japanese under Admiral Koenigi had brought some destroyers in and picked up all the Japanese that were on the island. At Noumea, we picked up some provisions and stopped at the island Pot and took them off to some French settlers. Then we headed for Chile. It took about a month to get to Chile. We went to Antofagasta and they sent us down to Tocopilla. We filled up the ship with nitrates. Nitrates are fertilizer, but they're also used for making explosives. We loaded the ship up with nitrates, and when it was full, we headed up north, and we pulled into Ecuador. Went up the river in Ecuador to a place called Guayaquil. At Guayaquil, they put some balsa wood on the ship. The next day after we left Guayaquil, there was a terrible storm, and the gun crews could not stand watch in the gun tubs on the bow or the stern. I was able to get up to the bridge, and it looked like the bow was over your head at one time, and then the stern was, you look back in the stern, it looked like it was way up in the air. And the captain said that he was afraid that the ship might break in two. But the next day everything calmed off and we was all right. We was off of Central America, and there was a big flock of pelicans that was stretched about a mile. We went on up to the coast of Mexico. As we got close to Mexico, wait a minute now. Wrong. After we left Guayaquil, we went to San Francisco, where we unloaded the ship. After they unloaded the ship went down to Long Beach, California. They had a long pier out there that was a floating pier. It was a quarter mile out in the water, and there was small tractors pulling trailers. Each one of the trailers had a 2,000-pound bomb, and that's what we loaded the ship up with. We had a black flag up to let people know there were explosives. Long Beach was a good place for leave. When we got off the ship, it was only a short walk to Long Beach, and it was just like Coney Island with a lot of entertainment places. After we loaded the ship, we headed south, and for a long, boring trip. We crossed the equator. We didn't have anybody we had the same people on, so everybody was in Neptunus Rex, and we didn't have anything to do. We went south, way south, and out of those shipping lanes, and the ship went below New Zealand. In north, when we left home, it was June, but when down there, it was winter time. And as we went below New Zealand and we could see the South Island, it was snowing. We pulled into Hobart, Tasmania, and filled up with supplies, and it was a good place for leave. They were real friendly and took real good care of us. Then we went to Perth, Australia, where the local people brought in bushels of apples and to give to the crew. We left there and went to Colombo, Ceylon. Colombo, Ceylon. Colombo, Ceylon was a crowded place, and there was the substandard housing, and there. We went to the Grand Oriental Hotel, which was run by the British, and we knew the food would be good. There were a lot of shops that were selling ebony and ivory. I bought 3 ebony elephants. We left there and went to India. We went up the Hooghly River to Calcutta and docked. Calcutta was a lot like Ceylon, overcrowded and everything. The ship was docked in an area that was a slum. You had to go through a slum area to get into town. And I noticed in the shacks and everything that there would be pumps on every other corner, and I figured that nobody had water in their houses, and everybody filled up the water from the pumps. When we went into Calcutta, there was the British had a grand hotel there, and we knew the food would be safe there. In front of the Grand Hotel was a large sidewalk, and there were a lot of people lying on the sidewalk. And we were told that every day they would come and pick up the dead bodies. There was a lot of beggars, and there were some fortune tellers and stuff there. When they finished unloading the ship, they loaded it up with jute sacks. We left Calcutta, and it was a long trip back to the Panama Canal. Is where we went next. We stopped at Perth on the way to get fuel and supplies. This would be the first time that I went through the Panama Canal, and it was interesting. Gatun Lake was pretty, and we went through, part of the canal was through rocks. It was cut through rock, and it was interesting where we were lifted from one level to another with locks. After we went through the canal, we went to Port of Spain, Trinidad. We unloaded the jute sacks there. Trinidad was a lot like, as overcrowded like India and Ceylon, and the housing was substandard. When we left Port of Spain, in Port of Spain I bought some a fish and a bird made out of cow horn. When we left there, we went to Georgetown in British Guyana. We had to go up a river with jungles on each side. They had some barges, and we loaded bauxite ore. Bauxite ore is aluminum ore. We took the aluminum ore, went to the United States, to the Mississippi River. We picked up a pilot off a pilot boat and started up the Mississippi River. We went past New Orleans and took the ship to West Wego, and the ore was unloaded there. Everybody on the ship was taken off. All the armed guard was taken off of the ship and taken over to an armed guard center in Algiers. Algiers is across the river from Mississippi, but it was part of New Orleans. At Algiers, they gave us all 2 weeks leave, and I was able to go home. It was the first time I was at home for 14 months. At home, he was treated like a king, and everybody treated the servicemen great. The movies were free, and if you went into a tavern, you couldn't buy a drink. Everybody had one set up for you when you walked in. Uh, the Dad had a 32 Chevy that I could drive around. There were gas rationing, and neighbors came around to make sure that I had enough coupons to get gas. Went back to New Orleans, and then and waited for my next assignment. They put me in a Jeep with a sea bag, my sea bag, and they took me over to New Orleans. And when I went down to the dock to see what the next assignment was, I was surprised. It was a small boat that was about 117 feet long. When the war started out, the Japanese invaded all the islands, Philippines, and so forth. And before the war and everything, large ships would come into Manila, and they would bring supplies and trading goods and stuff. And small ships, and some of them were called sampans, would take these goods to all the small islands, because the big ships couldn't go to all the places. And they either took over those boats or they sank them. So when we started taking the islands back, we needed those boats to supply the different sources, and that's what the FP was built for. And the Higgins Company built these ships, and the Higgins Company is the one that built LCTs, LCIs, and all those invasion craft. They all had flat bottoms, and so did the FP, which was bad. One of the Puebla was a famous FP. It was the ship that the North Koreans captured. We left. The other thing that was really different about this job was that I was the only Navy person on the ship. There were 20, what they call maritime. They had schools called maritime because they didn't have enough merchant seamen. And when they were graduated from that, that's what they called them, maritime. And most of the crew was maritime. We left the harbor and went down the Mississippi River. When we got to the Caribbean, we joined a convoy of three other small ships and one destroyer as an escort. We went to Cuba. At Cuba, they had a Army PX where we could visit and get souvenirs and things. I sent cigars home to some people that I thought would enjoy them. We left Cuba, and that would be the second time that I went through Panama. We went through the canal, and we started up north, and when we got got almost to Mexico, we had a cook that got its appendicitis, and they radioed San Pedro, and they sent a PBY flying boat. It landed next to us, and a small boat came out from Mexico and took the cook over to the PBY. Then we went on up the coast. We stopped at a place called Manzanilla in Mexico. And Manzanilla was different than most of the tourists. If you went across the border, this place wasn't like those places. It was like the old Mexico. I was eating in an outdoor restaurant when I looked and you see the farmers coming in to town, and they would be riding mules or horses, and they had a serape over their shoulder and a sombrero, and it looks like that area looked like the old real Mexico. We left Manzanillo and we went to San Pedro. San Pedro is the seaport for Los Angeles. And here I was, we were there 30 days, and here I was, I could come and go whenever I wanted to. I forgot to mention that when I got on this ship that my only orders were that I had to be on that ship when it left port anytime. So there I was, I could leave anytime I wanted to and go into Los Angeles. I went in and seen all of the tourist spots, and while I was there, while we were there, they brought on 5 artillery soldiers, and they were going to take care of the gun on the ship. There was a dual purpose here. When this ship got to New Guinea, they were going to take everybody off it, and the Coast Guard was going to take care of it. And these 5 Army gunners, their outfit was in New Guinea. And so it was transportation. It served two purposes. It was transportation for them to get to their units. I became real good friends with the gunners. Our quarters were in the bow. There's what they call a forecastle. In the front of the bow, there was a room with 6 bunks. Across from that room, on the other side, was a head, or what we call a head. It was a toilet, and so we all stayed all in that one room, and I got to be very good friends with them. The first day out, we had a heavy seas, and that thing was pitching and rolling, and coming up out of the bow would come out of the water and slam down on the water, and the bow went under the water, and on the top of our room was a hatch, an escape hatch, and it was leaking, and the water was coming in to our room. There was no way for it to get out because the door was a hatch, and everybody was thrown up into the water, and it was a real bad mess, and we were all sick as could be. And I was on the top bunk, and there was a phone. The phone rang. The captain says, "Tell those gunners they got to come up here. They didn't get the ammunition secure and it's sliding around." And I felt sorry for them as they went out the door there. They had rigged a rope up from the bow to the bridge so they wouldn't get swept over the. Now the next day it was calm, but we were all just as sick as can be, and it takes a while to get over that. We went to Hawaii, and we left there and headed south, and we crossed the equator, and this time I was able to initiate some polywogs into the Neptunus Rex. We went on down to a place called Funafuti. Funafuti was a coral reef, and it was a circle, a big circle, and it was flat, and there was an opening in one end, and we went in there and anchored, and the whole coral reef was flat, and at one side of it had a long stretch, and it was long enough to build an airfield, and there were B-24s taking off and landing, and we could see them very well because they were at eye level and real close, so we got a good look at them. When they're coming down, sometimes there were holes in the wings, and it looks like bits and pieces, and the propeller may not be turning, so we knew they were in action. After the war, I did some research on that, and I think they were that the Americans had invaded Saipan in the Mariana Islands, and I think they were helping them with their invasion. We left Saipan, and we headed for New Guinea, and we ended up at the east end of New Guinea at a place called Milne Bay. We got a pilot to go into Milne Bay, and we docked at Gili Gili. Gili Gili was a famous place because the Japanese, when they landed on New Guinea, they were going to go around the island, go on the shore, and get to Port Moresby, but the Australians stopped them at Gili Gili. We filled up with fuel and stuff, and right close to Gili Gili was Finchhaven. We went to Finchhaven. There was a Navy base, and I asked them if they had any orders for me, and they said no. So I stayed on the ship, and we left Milne Bay, and as we went along the coast of the northern coast or the coast of New Guinea. Why, there's several towers wanted to know who we were. The next stop we had was Oro Bay. At Oro Bay, I went ashore and I wrote a letter to Bob. And we got back on this, and that night we had a poker game, and I stayed up late, so I was sleeping late. When some of the crew come running in, and hey, your brother's on the ship, and Bob and a friend of his, he had gotten the letter and saw the date on the top, and he went down to the harbor master and says, "Is it FP-141?" He said, "Yeah, that's it sitting out there." And he was able to hitchhike. There was a lot of LCIs running around the harbor, and he was able to hitchhike a ride, and he had come over to the ship, and everybody was celebrating about that. It was really neat, and the cooks, they broke out some chicken and fried it and made a big meal. They had Cokes that they were saving, they got out, and we had a big party. The next day I went over to see Bob. He was with the 11th Airborne, and they were camped on the airfield. Bob took me in to meet with his captain, Captain Lee. Captain Lee was killed in the Philippines later on, and they had a tower there with a zip line on it where they practiced, like when they were landing with a parachute. They wanted me to go up on that, but Captain Lee said no. There's been some people that's been hurt doing that. I don't want them to do it, so I didn't do it. We were there 9 days, and I spent quite a bit of time. There was another thing that happened in Oro Bay. We had our captain of the small ship was Mallory, and the rumor was around that he'd never been. The only time he'd ever been on a ship was when he went to on World War I, went to Europe, and they were having problems, and they thought he was dangerous. He couldn't see very well. The day before we got to Oro Bay, the first mate was steering the ship, and he was directing the first mate, and the first mate said, "Captain, there's a reef up in front of us," and he said, "Give it a little right rudder," and the guy swung the rudder over real quick, the wheel real quick, and we barely missed the reef. And they took a message into the harbor master and said that this guy was dangerous and shouldn't be doing it. Well, that afternoon, we were docked there in Oro Bay, and they came along and told them they wanted to move the ship out in the middle of the bay. And so Mallory was going to do this job, and there's a thing called an engine order telegraph. It's a round thing with a lever on the top. You pull the lever down, and it says, pull it backwards, it's slow astern, push it forward, it's slow ahead. And he was standing on the wrong side, and whatever happens to the engine order telegraph, there's one down in the engine just exactly like it, and when we turn ours up there, it turns there so they know what they want to do, and the bell rings. And he stood in front of that engine order telegraph, and he pulled the thing back. He thought he was pulling it on slow astern, and it was slow forward. And we had cast off the stern lines, and the stern was floating out, so that was supposed to back away from the dock. Instead, flow ahead. We were still tied up, and it started crunching into the dock. Then he panicked and pulled all the way down, and he thought he was going to go full astern. It was full ahead, and he started knocking the dock down. And the first mate had to go over and grab the handle to keep them from tearing it up worse. That afternoon, they came around and took Mallory off, and they brought on a new guy that was a Welshman, and he was a real character and a real seaman. When we left Oro Bay, or the next time that the water was rough, he would stand up on the bridge laughing while we were all hanging over the rail throwing up. We left Oro Bay, and we went west. For a while we were towing barges with engineering equipment. We had a pile driver on our barge. We dropped them off where at the engineers where they were going, and we went up to Galvink Bay, and Galvink Bay was up near the top of the western end of New Guinea. And in the middle of Galvink Bay was an island called Biak Island, and the Americans had went ashore there and were fighting the Japanese, but they had them all chased up in the mountains, and they built an airport at Biak, and my cousin Jack Crane was flying out of that airport, and his plane was shot down. Everybody bailed out except Jack, and he was killed. And when I got out of the service, and I had his obituary, I looked at the date when he died, and I looked at my I looked at my signal log. That was there. We turned around and went back to the other end of New Guinea. Then this time when we went to Milne Bay, we went in there, took everybody off the ship, and the Coast Guard took over. I went into Finch Haven and the Navy base, and they said that I would catch a transport back.
Was your duty done then? Were you done in this? Was that being discharged, or
Oh,
you
no.
were just getting off?
That's
getting
a
off.
second ship. I got one more ship to go.
Okay.
Yeah, and there, I got on a transport going back to the United States to San Francisco, and it was faster than Liberty ship, so it didn't take as long to get back to San Francisco. When I get back there, the first thing I do is went to a telephone, called home, and told them it was all right and everything, and something wrong here. Told them everything was all right. How did I get? No. They sent me home from there. Okay, I was sent home from San Francisco, and then I was sent back down to Algeria, Algiers, and I was waiting in there for the next assignment, and the next assignment was another Liberty ship, and it was in Georgia. So they loaded up the gun gun crew. One of the new gun crew was a signalman, and I would be his boss. He was seaman first class. His name was Robert Goodrich. And one of the best friends I met was a gunner's mate first class, and his name was Cranston Fletcher, and called Dusty. And Dusty and I got on a pickup truck with all the gear, and we got on a ferry, went across, made sure that the gear got on the train. Then the train was going to go to Brunswick, Georgia. Halfway there, the train with the car was an old one, must have been from a troop train from World War I, because it had benches instead of seats. Well, they pulled us into Waycross, unhooked the locomotive, and we wait for another locomotive. They brought us out of lunch, brought lunches to us, hooked up another locomotive, and then we went to Brunswick. At Brunswick, we were at a place where they had an airship base. That had a blimp, a large hangar with a blimp in it that was something like a Goodyear blimp. And one of the jobs they gave us while we were waiting to get on our ship, we had to, we would go in, and there was some ropes hanging down from the blimp. And, three of us get on each rope and pull the blimp out. And when it come back in the evening, we get a hold of the ropes and pull the blimp back in. And after 5 days, we got on our ship, and it was the George W. Norris. And we sailed right away to Savannah, Georgia. In Savannah, Georgia, they put on the guns and brought on ammunition. The gunners were busy taking the ammunition and putting them in the containers, or what would you call? I don't know what you call them. Anyway, we're putting the ammunition away. From Savannah, after we got the guns on, we went to New York to Staten Island, and they loaded up the ship. They were loading it up for the soldiers in European for the soldiers fighting in Europe. When we got the ship loaded, we got in a convoy of 58 ships and went across to England. We pulled up to the St. George Channel between Ireland and England, and went up the channel to the Mersey River. There we got a pilot that took us into Liverpool. We got a one-day leave in Liverpool, and we got on a train, went to Liverpool, and we never got to see what the place looked like. The streets weren't very wide, and when you was on one side of the street, you couldn't see the buildings on the other side of the street. That's how bad the fog was. And we went into an English restaurant and got some cream crumpets, and that's about all we know about England. We got back on the ship, and it took 7 different convoys to get us around England over to Belgium, but it took 7 different convoys, and I took 7 different convoys. We were at the Scheldt River. We picked up a pilot, and the pilot took us into Antwerp. At Antwerp, they unloaded the ship. They were having attacks by buzz bombs there, and about the second day, the alarm rang, and I was my quarters were under the bridge in that area. I ran up the back ladder, and I started up the ladder. When I looked up, there was a great big orange ball up in the fire. They'd hit one of those the anti-aircraft had hit one of those buzz bombs and blew up. We never had it. One thing about a buzz bomb, when it comes over, it goes put, 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 and when you hear it shut off, you know it's coming down. That's kind of scary. We had an air raid, but it was not at the dock area. The alarms went off, but they went somewhere else. We had to leave, and we got on a bus and went to Brussels. In Brussels, there's a famous monument right in the middle of the city, and it's a little boy standing in a pool, relieving himself, and that's a must-see for anybody that ever goes to Brussels. We went and saw that. When we got the ship unloaded, we started out and we stopped to get ballast. And sometimes when the ship don't have anything in it, they load it up a little bit to keep it steady. We loaded up some ballast at Terneuzen, Netherlands. We never got ashore there. Then we had a trip to go from there to get out of the channel into the ocean, and on that way, they started dropping depth charges. And at one time, they dropped 50 depth charges. So there must have been some submarines around. we got out into the Atlantic and we got in a 100-ship convoy and went back to, when we got close to New York, about 3 days out, the escorts in front of the convoy dropped some more depth charges. So there must have been some subs there. We went into New York and we docked in Brooklyn where they loaded up, where we gave us another load that was going back to Antwerp. This time when we went out, we had about 100 plus ships. When we got about a day out of England, I was in the lunchroom, or in the having lunch, and I heard some noise, sound like a couple depth charges went off. But the alarm went off, and so I ran up to the deck, up to the bridge. And when I got up there, I looked over, and there was a Liberty ship off to the left of us, on the inside roll, standing straight up and down. And we had an argument about whether it was the stern or the bow that was sticking up later on. From the time that depth charge went off and that thing disappeared was about 4.5 minutes. And we looked up ahead, and it looked like there was about 4 ships on fire, and they had hit a torpedo had hit a tanker. I had read an article after the war that it was the Liberty ship was the Cyrus McCormick, and the tanker was Empire Gold. And when they hit the tanker, the oil came out and went in big puddles, and it looks like ships on fire. And we had to steer through this stuff. The ships that were hit were the number one. The Cyrus was the number one in our row. There was 10 ships in a row. The number one, and the tanker was number 2, and we was about number 5. So that was. And reading that article afterwards, I found out that 2 of the armed guard were killed, and from the Cyrus McCormick, and 4 of the Merchant Marine, and there was probably a lot more of that from the tanker, but they didn't. And the article didn't tell how many were killed. And instead of going up to Liverpool this time, we went right straight into the channel, went straight up to Shell Estuary, and went into Antwerp. After we unloaded the ship, we went back out to the Atlantic, and I don't have any record of we were in a convoy, but no, we didn't. I didn't know how many were in the ship. I didn't have anything to show about it. Now this one thing good with this would be the last convoy we were ever in, because right after this, the Germans surrendered, and we could open up the portholes and the hatches and get some fresh air and everything. When we came back this time, we went to Baltimore to load up this ship. And after they loaded this ship up, we went to a place called Port Richmond, and they put 2 locomotives on there. And when they loaded the ship up this time, they didn't put any military goods, because they didn't need any. Everything was supplies, like food and stuff. And we went to Italy with the ports open, and when we got to Italy, we went through the Gibraltar and signaled to them, and the Isle of Capri we signaled to. We got to Italy, we went to Naples, and they sent us down to Livorno. Livorno is where the Leaning Tower of Pisa was, and I went to the top of that. They had had Germans. They paid German prisoners to unload the ship, and so I traded one of them a carton of cigarettes for a coal bucket helmet. When we got this ship unloaded, we loaded up the ship with used jeeps and trucks and war material to take over to the Pacific to fight to Japan. And we left Italy. We stopped at Oran, Africa for mail and for directions. And we went through past Gibraltar, and headed for Panama. And when we were about a couple of days before we got to Panama, the radio operator came in and told everybody that the Americans had dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And a few days later, he come back and told us that he dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. When we went through the canal, everybody was celebrating, and we went ashore. When you come back, they had a MP there, frisking everybody, taking their whiskey bottles and dumping it down the drain and throwing the bottles. They had a barrel full of bottles. We left Panama, heading for the Philippines. And after we left Panama, the war in Japan ended. We opened up the portholes and the hatches and got fresh air. And we stopped at Leyte for some directions. And then we went to Manila. At Manila, they came aboard, and they started telling the people that were going to get discharged and who was going to stay. I was supposed to get a discharge, and there were 3 of our crew, and Dusty was one of those, and the signalman, my signalman Robert Goodrich was another one, and Dusty, they made him charge. He was a first-class gunner mate. He was charged of those 3 people, and they gave him the armed guard signal or minutes or a log, the armed guard log. And he got home with that armed guard log, and he made a copy of it and sent it to me, so I know every place that we went. And when we got ready to go, about the day before we went, there was some beer left on the ship, and we got all the beer out and put it on a hatch, and we had that would have been bad, wouldn't it? That would have been a terrible. And everybody really got drunk. They were on our ship. On that ship, they were putting outhouses on the edge of the rails, and somebody could get in and poop, and it'd go into the water. And what they were doing, they were going to haul Japanese people back to Japan. The first load, Dusty wrote me a letter later, and he said the first load was women and old people that came there to service the Japs. And he said the second load was soldiers, and they had their bayonets on, and they were a surly group, and they had a bunch of military police that were guarding. The military police were ready to go home, and they didn't care much for the job, so that was bad. But they told the military police and everybody on the ship that you weren't to talk to the Japanese, you weren't to harass them or, say anything to them, And Dusty said in his letter that they were a surly lot, and and kind of arrogant, until they pulled into Yokohama Harbor, and they looked out, and there are all these American battleships and stuff, and they changed it a little bit. One of the things that was interesting to me is that after the war, or when the war was over, the Bob's outfit, the 11th Airborne, was the first ones to go into Japan. And he told me that they went in and landed at an airport. The Japanese were on one side of Japanese officers were on one side of the airfield, and the soldiers were on the other. The Japanese piled their swords in the middle of the field, and the American officers picked them up and passed them out to the soldiers. And Bob got one of these. He says that it was kind of interesting. Whenever they drive anywhere in Japan, they'd all turn their backs on them. I got on a ship to go back to the United States, and The last time I went down, I was on the ship, I was in the hold for the day, but did I say anything about that? But they brought me up on the bridge in the daytime to stand watch. And so I could see everything that was going on. But on this ship, they didn't need anybody on the bridge, so I had to stay down on the deck with the multitudes. At Seattle, I think I talked about that. At Seattle, I was there about 5 days. They wouldn't let anybody go into town. We had movies on the base, and they had a beer garden, and it rained every day. But I was glad to get on a train and head for home. We pulled into Chicago, got on the South Shore, and went home. They didn't know I was coming, so when Don knocked on the door, they were all surprised. Some hitches there. That one place there, if I'd had this thing and looked at it, we'd had this done, wouldn't it?
I have a couple questions to ask you about. Did you ever, you talked about your recreation things you did. Did you ever get to go to a USO show?
Yes, we went to USO once, and when we went to USO, they had a dance, and Diana Shore was there, and she took us to the dance. We sat in the back seat of a convertible.
Wow.
And she took us to dance. My friend, we were over at the Rose Bowl. My friend was there, and I went over to see him, and we both went to the dance. He found the girl that he liked real well, and he's trying to find her the next day and couldn't.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to the story that we've not covered in the interview?
Well, one of the interesting things is if I would have never joined the Navy, if I would have rather been in the Air Force. I would have joined the Air Force if I had to do over, or at least I wish they would have put me on a regular Navy ship, because it was kind of boring, not much action.
What do you wish more people knew about veterans?
About veterans. I need these things. You need to give me these things, and I get time to think about them.
That's okay. That's okay.
Say that again.
What do you wish more people knew about the veterans?
I don't know.
That's okay. That's fair.
If I thought about that, I might think of something.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, I guess this is it, unless there's anything else you'd like to say.
GI Bill.
Oh, yes. Tell me, you said you went to school with the GI Bill. Where did you go and what did you do? What did you study and how did that work out?
Yeah. One of the best things about being in the service was that when I got out, they had the GI Bill, and I was able to go to Indiana University. In my senior year, I got married, and we lived on the campus, and I had this little beautiful little girl. No, and there's one thing I know, that with the college degree that I had, I was able to get a good job and a good retirement from that job.
What was the job that you got, or what did you do?
I was a chemist working for Eli Lilly.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank my husband Mark for his video recording that he did, and then I also would like to thank you, Billy J. Crane, who also happens to be my dad. And I just want to say I love you, and I really appreciate what you did for the service, and I'm so proud that you were there. Thank you again.
Is there any possibility of using that?